Hello, and thanks for stopping by. As we've often seen on this channel, there's no shortage of places in London which bear unusual or evocative names. Perhaps the coolest name of all though belongs to a street which is located right in the heart of the city, just moments away from St Paul's Cathedral. A quiet backwater known as Knightrider Street. As well as evoking thoughts of medieval chivalry, the name Knightrider is also, nowadays, likely to conjure up memories of the American television series Knightrider, which ran between 1982 and 1986 and starred the legendary David Hasselhoff as Michael Knight, a former LA detective who took to fighting bad guys with the aid of his trusty car, KITT. KITT, which in case you were wondering was an acronym for Knight Industries 2000, was a sleek, black Pontiac Firebird Trans Am which could think, talk, and even drive itself. Concepts which, in the 21st century, don't really seem so far-fetched anymore, do they? As for London's Knightrider Street, and there's a Knightrider Court too by the way, well, as I'm sure you've already guessed, the name is a lot older than the 1980s TV show. Running between Adderall Hill, and the pedestrian area split between Sermon Lane and St Peter's Hill, which leads down to the Millennium Bridge, and also crossing Godalming Street, the first known record of Knightrider Street can be traced all the way back to 1322, when the name was squashed together as one word: Knightrider Street. Knightrider Street is also clearly shown on a Ralph Agas map, which dates from the 1560s. By that point it had evolved into three separate words, with rider being spelt with a Y. Back then, Knightrider Street was said to be lined with rather grand houses, although sadly it's looking a little bland and down the hill nowadays. The exact origin of the term Knightrider is unknown, although there are two possible explanations. The first comes from John Stowe, who, in his early guidebook, The Survey of London, which was published in 1598, suggests the term came about due to the fact that knights used to ride along here on their way to jousting tournaments held at Smithfield Market. In his own words, then is Knightrider Street, so called, as is supposed, of knights well armed and mounted at the Tower Royal, riding from thence through that street west to Creed Lane, and so out at Ludgate towards Smithfield, when they were there to tourney or joust, or otherwise show activities before the king and states of the realm. As romantic as this sounds, it's actually a fairly plausible explanation. The Tower Royal, Stowe mentions, was a palace believed to have been established in the 12th century by King Henry I, which once stood close to Knightrider Street, roughly where Mansion House Underground Station is now located. If you were heading from there towards Creed Lane and Smithfield, then Knightrider Street would indeed be a handy route to take. Also, Smithfield did indeed serve as a venue for jousting. The most notable tournament held there took place in June 1467, when Antoine, the Great Bastard of Burgundy, some nickname, eh, clashed with a fellow called Anthony Woodville, aka Lord Scale, Edward IV's brother-in-law. There's another clue at Smithfield related to its jousting past, a road at its southern point called Giltspur Street, spurs of course, golden ones in this case, being worn by knights when jousting. As well as referring to warriors on horseback, rider in Old English could also be used to describe those employed as messengers. So another theory is that Knightrider Street refers to two professions, knights and the messengers who carried out the important work of delivering news to the king and other nobles. Knightrider Court, meanwhile, a small cul-de-sac which lies at the eastern end of Knightrider Street, has only used the name since the late 18th century. Prior to that, it was known as the wonderfully titled Doolittle Lane, later to become Doolittle Alley, the origins of which, like Knightrider Street, are very old indeed. The name goes back to around the 12th century. Rather confusingly, Doolittle Lane, and as it's now known, Knightrider Court, has shifted location over the centuries. Originally, it used to be much longer, and was located just east of its current spot, beneath what's now this office block. Knightrider Street itself also used to be considerably longer. It ran beyond what's now its eastern end, all the way down to the junction with Faraday Street, approximately where this old police phone call box and a vintage piece of street furniture known as the electromatic traffic control system now stand. In centuries past, locals took to referring to the eastern end of Knightrider Street as Fish Street, due to the fact that, as you may well guess, a fish market used to be held there. This section, meanwhile, was known for a time as Little Knightrider Street, whilst the stretch between Godalming Street and Adel Hill was called Great Knightrider Street. It's hardly surprising that Knightrider Street and Knightrider Court have been chopped and changed so much over the years, for they've borne witness to much drama. They were already very old, of course, when the Great Fire tore through the city in 1666, and in 1886, a further major blaze destroyed a Christopher Wren church on Knightrider Street, which was known as St Mary Magdalene. In August 1939, Knightrider Street was also hit by a major gas explosion, which was heard for miles around, and injured over 100 people. It was even reported that commuters at Blackfriars Station were thrown off their feet by the blast. Along with all this, Knightrider Street has also been besieged by Cybermen. This occurred in the 1968 Doctor Who serial, The Invasion, which showed the terrifying cyborgs marching along here, along with shots of them stomping down the steps at nearby St Peter's Hill. There's an historic pub on Knightrider Street, the Centre Page, although sadly, at the time of making this video, it's not in business. This pub can trace its history all the way back to 1663, which, to put that into some context, was when nearby St Paul's Cathedral was still a tall Gothic structure. That old St Paul's, and the first incarnation of this tavern, would burn down just 3 years later in the Great Fire. For almost all its life, this pub was known as the Horn Tavern. It changed to the Centre Page in 2002, goodness knows why, and the present building dates from the 19th century. Amazingly, given the level of destruction wrought around here during the Blitz, it survived World War II. In recent years, this pub was famous for being Knightrider actor David Hasselhoff's favourite place to visit whenever he was in London. There was signed memorabilia by him on display in here, including a photo upon which he stated that he was the real Knightrider. The pub was even mentioned in Charles Dickens' very first novel, The Pickwick Papers, back when it was known as the Horn Coffee House, when, in chapter 64, Mr. Pickwick, who is locked up for debt in the nearby Fleet prison, sends a messenger to Horn's Coffee House in Doctor's Commons to fetch several bottles of wine to entertain his friends who have come to visit him. The Doctor's Commons Dickens mentions is a reference to a major complex once located at the western end of Knightrider Street, which, confusingly, had nothing to do with medicine. The Doctor's Commons, in this case, also known as the College of Civilians, was a society for those who practiced civil law, and like the Inns of Court, it provided living quarters, offices, and a library for barristers. Charles Dickens devotes an entire chapter to the Doctor's Commons in Sketches by Boz, his early collection of essays and observations, in which he introduces the society as a place where they grant marriage licenses to lovesick couples, and divorces to unfaithful ones, register the wills of people who have any property to leave, and punish hasty gentlemen who call ladies by unpleasant names. The Doctor's Commons remained on Knightrider Street until 1867, although the complex of buildings remained in place for several decades before being demolished. The old institution is now commemorated with this blue plaque on Queen Victoria Street. The site upon which the Doctor's Commons sat is now occupied by the huge Faraday building, which was built in the 1930s to serve as an international telephone exchange. Its northern side backs onto Knightrider Street. As grand as it looks, the mighty Faraday building was highly controversial when it first opened in 1933, the reason being that its two towers obscured the view of St Paul's Cathedral from certain angles. As a result, a new law was introduced to protect views of the cathedral, which remains in force today. It's for this reason that many office towers in the city are constructed in all manner of shapes, their curves and angles being designed to avoid blocking St Paul's. Returning to the Doctor's Commons, although as we've seen that was associated with law, there is an important medical connection to be had on Knightrider Street. It was here, at a house on this site in 1518, that Thomas Linacre established the Royal College of Physicians. Today, they're located in the far leafier Regent's Park. It's also worth noting that London's Knightrider Street isn't the UK's only example of this unusual name. There's another Knightrider Street in Maidstone in Kent, which is also very old. It dates back to at least the 1600s. Maidstone's Knightrider Street is of important historical note, as it was once home to a Member of Parliament named Lawrence Washington, an ancestor of none other than the first President of the United States, George Washington. Lawrence Washington lived between 1546 and 1619 and is buried in All Saints Church, which lies just opposite the western end of Maidstone's Knightrider Street. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this look at Knightrider Street. Is it a place you're familiar with? Did you know it had a twin in Maidstone? And are there any other unusually named streets and roads which you'd like me to cover? If so, please be sure to let me know in the comments. If you haven't yet subscribed to Rob's London, then I'd appreciate it very much if you could please consider doing so, as this, along with clicking the bell icon to receive notifications, would ensure that you don't miss out whenever I publish a new video. Plus, of course, it'd be wonderful to have you along. If you're feeling extra generous, you can also support my work with a tip via either my Ko-fi account, which I'll link below, or the YouTube thanks button, which appears as a heart icon beneath the video. Any such financial donations are of course greatly appreciated, and they really do help go towards creating content. Anyway, on that note, thanks again for watching friends. Stay well, and please be sure to stay tuned.